Yeah, we had a big move with Juan Soto, obviously. When we get to the coaching carousel, you think there's some legs here with Belichick going to UNC if we're going to talk about maybe Coach Belichick dealing with the transfer portal?
Yeah, no, I thought it was kind of like a joke account when I first saw it, but I mean, they're talking, for 6 hours, and I think from what I've heard from up there, there's a little bit of smoke, and really when you start thinking about it, it's not that far fetched as far as yes, it is Belichick, a huge name, but also the way that some of these college football programs now are starting to work like NFL franchises. They have a GM, they'll have a salary cap guy which runs their collective, and now that they're looking at more of an NFL structure. I mean, the game, especially in the SEC, is moving towards more of like an NFL light version. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. Although I do have some concerns because you go back and look at Herm Edwards when he took over Arizona State, and that was going to be like, hey, we're going to have a GM, we're going to run this like an NFL thing, and it didn't work out extremely well. So well, now it works out good for Arizona State because Kenny Dillingham has them in the college football playoff, but I'm kind of curious to see how that whole thing plays out.
It's kind of wild when you look at the buy spots right now. If you would have told me before the year Oregon and Georgia would be there, okay, I would believe you. I've been a big advocate of Boise State. I would have never thought they would have got a bye, though, before the season started, maybe make the playoff. And then Arizona State, we all know that, Peter, they were predict dead last in the Big 12 before the season started. So it's crazy how the buy spots ended up playing on out.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be one of the things that even talk to Commissioner Sankey and talk to people, especially, my gosh, I can't imagine how Oregon fans feel like, hey, you're the number one seed. You went undefeated all season long. Your gift may be taking a week off, not having a home game, and then having to play Ohio State or even a good quality Tennessee matchup. So I think one of the conversations that's going to happen after this first 2 years of the 12-team playoff, by the time we get to 2026, I think there's going to be some serious momentum about reseeding the field. Still having the same criteria for the field to get in. However, once they do it, then go by the college football playoff rankings of, hey, 1 through 12 are the highest ranked 12 teams that were selected. They reseed them and go from there.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about this, too. I've been saying this since the summer. I'm not a fan just because you win your conference championship that you get an automatic bye. 4 out of the 5 schools that do that get into the playoff. And my producer actually gave this idea to me because he goes, well, you still have to find a way to reward the conference champion in some way. Maybe just the 5 highest ranked conference champs, they just get a guaranteed home game, but not a guaranteed bye spot. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be ways to where they look at it, and and I haven't thought about that. I think what you do is you play it out for these 2 years. The only problem is because remember, we came to the college football playoff expansion 2 years before, right? This was supposed to happen in 2026, so there really wasn't a whole lot of time to kind of think this through. And right when they decided that they were going to expand it is right when conference alignment, started, or realignment started as well too. So one of the things I've learned by working with next to Greg Sankey so much over the last decade is like, hey, relax. Like, let's see how this whole thing plays out for a year. Let's talk about it. And I even saw the athletic director at Alabama, who's a good friend, Greg Byrne, came out and said, hey, listen, we might reevaluate our schedules in as far as maybe we should play easier schedules, because they felt like it was maybe we should make it easier for the teams because the SEC competition is so hard. I think that's a little bit of a ghost threat, and I think it's a little bit of an overreaction at this point right now. Let's see how this thing plays out. And hell, if you have 3 of the 4 teams in the semifinals from the SEC, then you can say, look, we told you this is the best. If not, and especially as much parity we've had in college football, then maybe you don't change a whole hell of a lot.
It also made no sense to me what Greg Burns said because there would be some merit to it if they lost an out-of-conference game that was a tough scheduled one. Their 3 losses were Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, and their out-of-conference schedule was, South Florida, Western Kentucky. They played Wisconsin and then Mercer. That's why it didn't add up for what he was saying.
Well, in a weird way, I mean, now listen, they had a tougher strength of schedule because they did play in the SEC and they played so many ranked teams, and they beat 3 of them. I get what he's saying. But I could argue the flip side of the conversation and the fact of because they did have a tough strength of schedule is why the committee would even compare them at some point to SMU. So listen, all I know is that, I know a little bit of college football. You probably know more. Nick Saban knows more than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And like him, love him, hate him, whatever, you have to respect his opinion. And if what I think the greatest coach in the history of college football says, these conferences are not made alike, whether it be the ACC or the Big 12 and the SEC. I'm probably going to lean towards backing his opinion.
Yes, so it's kind of funny how it works from week to week as Peter Burns is here with us, because last week I laughed at Miami fans and I said, well, Alabama, even though they don't have more wins, they beat Georgia, they beat South Carolina. What's your best win? And you could say the same thing here with SMU. I just think the committee made it clear they had a message, and maybe they were sensitive to this because everyone said, oh, these conference championship games aren't going to matter. They didn't punish teams like SMU, Texas, and Penn State for losing their conference championship games. And we always ask for consistency with this in this very ambiguous product. And we got consistency from the committee.
Yeah. And again, it's consistently inconsistent, right?
Yeah.
This year might be most deserving. Last year, you could say Florida State was definitely most deserving, but they put a better team in Alabama per se. So it goes back and forth. I mean, that's the struggle part about it. So you're going to find out what happens. I mean, the thing is, and I talked to Rhett Lashley about it and others, and he made a good point. He goes, listen, at some point after 12 games, Alabama, Miami played 12 games, Ole Miss, South Carolina, we played 12 games. The College Football Committee said we were the top, we were worthy enough to be selected. Our resume versus Alabama as SMU was better than Alabama's. That's what they already said. So why should I get dinged for earning a bonus game? And I can't disagree with that. And that's why I thought the selection committee should select SMU, and ultimately they did.
You said they should. Were you positive that they would, though? Because I said this yesterday when I was on the air. I thought they should take SMU, but I thought they were going to take Alabama.
I'm not good at many things, but maybe the only thing that I've been good at in 11 years is I've correctly predicted after all the conference championship games what the field would be. Even when there were some kind of years where there was a little bit, not a lot of them, but some controversial. And I nailed it again this year, like others, because I really realized that with SMU, especially what you had a former ACC athletic director that's sitting on the board, another ACC former athletic director, and a former ACC coach on that committee, along with a couple of Big Ten guys. And after what happened to FSU, I knew they weren't going to do it once again. And combine that and go, it's a coin flip. And at some point, you're going to say, I'm going to just agree. I mean, you basically would have been a de facto ending the ACC as a conference because you would have been to there with those committee members and said the ACC is a joke conference, and they're not going to do that. It may play out that way like it did in the Pac-12 that led to the realignment, but that's not the case right now.
What do you think the bare minimum is for the Texas fan? We know Sark has done an incredible job there, back-to-back years in the playoff. Their best win this year was A&M. They lost to Georgia twice. Their road, they play Clemson. Then if they win, they get Arizona State. What's the bare minimum, how far Sark has to go for Texas fans, in your opinion, to feel satisfied about this season?
I mean, farther than he's already done more than Lane Kiffin did at Ole Miss, and even Eli Drinkwitz over at Missouri, where they felt like this was a college football playoff run for him. And truthfully, he's got a lot less pressure on him than, say, Ryan Day at home after what happened in the way that they've absolutely just been pathetic against Michigan. So I think for Sark, they would be disappointed with a first-round exit, especially at the hands of Clemson. I think, honestly, SEC fans in general would be more disappointed in Texas than Texas fans would be because they're like, bro, you're going to come in here to this conference, you're going to get them the championship game in year one, and then you're going to lose to an ACC squad. Like that's like the whole conference would be pissed at Texas. But I like Sark. I think Sark is open. He's honest. He knows where, hey, they have issues, and they just ran into a Georgia team that was not going to be denied once again.
Yeah, it's a tough road, by the way, for Tennessee. And I'm glad you brought up that Ohio State-Tennessee matchup. But they're a team that I think is dangerous. Now, even if they win, they have to go up against Oregon. But with the formula that Michigan kind of has displayed up against Ohio State, I like that Tennessee defense. We know Sampson's a heck of a back. I know Nico Iamaleava has been up and down this year, but I think we're going to see them run that ball a lot up against Ohio State and kind of get physical with them.
Yeah, I think the big thing in that game is obviously the fact that it is in Columbus was monstrous, and that's why it was so huge that they ended up having the 8 versus the 9, and that was flipped because I damn sure would put Tennessee in that game had it been in Neyland and 110,000 people going absolutely crazy, nearly cursed, but that's exactly what they would have done on there. Heupel's known for has his first quarter scripts, and traditionally nobody has scored faster in college football in the last three seasons than his teams. And so if all of a sudden Tennessee gets the ball first, they march right down the field and score, buddy, there might be some boo birds out there in Columbus that all of a sudden things get real tricky for Ryan Day's security as the head coach over at Ohio State. With that being said, I do have some concerns about Nico Iamaleava. Cali kid, how is he going to play up there? A, in that environment, B, in that weather. I think it'll be a run fest, and obviously we saw what Michigan was able to do if it turns out to be that way.
On the way out with Peter Burns from the SEC Network, Georgia, we saw the Carson Beck injury. Georgia's been vulnerable all year. They still won the SEC championship game. Beck got in there right at the end after the helmet did fly off to have the game-winning handoff. We don't know what his status is going to be. There were some things out there today with the extent of the injury, and now they don't feel like he's going to be able to go in that first playoff game for Georgia. What's your view of Georgia now with the uncertainty surrounding Carson Beck?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of, you could say Ohio State and Cardell Jones back in 2014. It reminds me of Stetson Bennett taking over for Georgia a couple years ago when they had some injuries. Is I did notice, if you go back and look at the game film, we're on the field right at halftime, and I noticed just the way the Georgia bench almost exploded when Gunnar Stockton got his opportunity. It was almost like Rudy getting an opportunity to play at Notre Dame. Like, they love this kid. And, Trevor Etienne and him kind of like had this like really cool moment right before the snap where they like looked at each other, like high-fived and patted each other on the head. And it was like, all right, buddy, like, it's your time. And I thought that was really, really cool. He played extremely well. The offense actually engaged pretty well, minus outside of that horrifically bad pick. And that's one of the reasons why he's been behind Carson Beck, is that, hey, he just doesn't have the experience. They got plenty enough time. They got a good coordinator in Mike Bobo. Now they're going to have to rely on defense, and it's something that Kirby Smart kind of likes, because he's done that, found a way to win a couple of games, including maybe arguably the hardest college football schedule we've ever seen, and what they had to go through in the gauntlet this year.
They kind of remind me of the Chiefs. Everyone keeps on saying they're not going to get there. They're vulnerable, and they still won the SEC. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you Georgia can't win it all once again this year now.
I know. Trust me. After they lost to Ole Miss, I told people, I was like, listen, if you want some value, go ahead and put money on Georgia winning the SEC championship, because at that point it was like 20 to 25 to 1 or so that they would even get in. They need some help to get in, but damn, they're like this football zombie right now. It's really tough to take them out.
All right, last thing I'll ask you. I'm a big fan of Kalen DeBoer. Year one, I thought he had to make the college football playoff. They obviously were the first team out. How do you look back at the Crimson Tide season?
Yeah, what I expected, I thought they would go 9-3 and miss the college football playoff. They went 9-3. I thought there was going to be a lot of attrition. There was. I thought they had kind of figured it out with Milroe. Once they figured out that, hey, he wasn't Michael Penix, how they were going to use them. You go back and look at the LSU game where they just, turned him into more of a running quarterback that had a little bit of a pass threat ability, and it was perfect. And yet what ended up costing them was just laying an egg, something that Nick Saban teams never did in the history of him over being in Alabama. So, but overall, a lot of attrition out there. I still think I'd be surprised if they're not a college football playoff team next year. I just think in Kalen DeBoer, he's a winner. And I think, the floor is set with DeBoer at 9-3, and there's only ways to go up there in Tuscaloosa.
He's Peter Burns from the SEC Network. Peter, appreciate you doing this today.
See you, man.